Namaste. Who am I? Who are we? What is the purpose of life? It is due to big questions like these that individuals turn to science and religion for answers. In our modern day, many seem to think that these two fields of knowledge are incompatible with each other. Some say that science addresses how questions, while religion deals with why questions. As explained throughout our study of Idols of the Mind versus True Reality thus far, such divisive understanding, in German Verstand, is symptomatic of an immature stage of consciousness that has not yet reached the holistic comprehension of reason, Vernunft. Dr. Bhaktimadhava Puri explains that, quote, our real identity is as part of the whole. We are part of something greater than ourselves, beyond our localized existence. And yet the whole is not merely beyond or opposed to oneself, since one is included in the whole. Real education is meant to learn about this, end quote. How and why questions both pertain to the whole that we are inquiring about. Both the questions and the answers are related to each other within the context of the whole. Of course, the relationship between science and religion cannot be fully encapsulated by the relation between how and why questions. However, this vague comparison does point to the central role that thought and consciousness play in inquiring about the truth. Thus, a proper science of thought and consciousness is fundamental to both modern science and religion. So, what is the difference between and relation between these two subtle faculties? Is consciousness the container of thought content? Is consciousness a passive awareness opposed to active thinking? Let us consider that thought itself is fundamental to reality. At a certain stage of its development, thought appears separate from itself in the form of an external object. There are three distinct moments in this dynamic organic activity. 1, the knower or subject, 2, the known or object, and 3, knowing, the subject-object relationship, i.e. consciousness. Typically, modern thinkers believe that natural objects exist externally and independently from the subjective agents who observe them. But Immanuel Kant demonstrated the essential role of the subjective conscious agent in comprehending the unity of an object and its variegated properties. This was Kant's unity of apperception. Objects cannot be properly known when they are conceived as opposed to the subjective agent. Again, divisive understanding is an immature stage of consciousness succeeded by holistic reason. Dr. B. M. Puri explains that, quote, when we considered in mere opposition, duality seems to represent no relation, but when each aspect of duality is considered as relatable to the other, we arrive at what German philosopher G.W. F. Hegel called being for self, end quote. Modern science has neglected this category of being for, and has instead been absorbed in studying being. This is a result of the historic disregard for the formal and final aspects of cause elucidated by Aristotle, and an emphasis on the material and efficient aspects. This was advocated by Francis Bacon, and when coupled with the separation of mind and matter apparently described by René Descartes, we are left with a foundation ripe for the development of materialistic science. Thus, Dr. Puri describes, quote, without understanding its purpose or relation with the whole, a leg of an elephant could be misconceived as a tree stump. Without knowledge of that for the sake of which a thing exists, it can take on a completely different significance altogether. So, by studying the different finite aspects of the world without understanding their overall purpose, we cannot properly understand anything. We don't have the full information we need to properly explain things. Thus, being for, or understanding the purpose of life, has become something many people no longer ask anymore. They think that the purpose of life is simply to enjoy the senses and that everything is finished at the time of death. End quote. Proper consideration of being for results in holism, while neglecting it produces atomism. The spectrum of mindsets among contemporary scientists, who may arrive at either holistic or atomistic conclusions, can be better comprehended by considering the various gestalts or form of consciousness that every human being has the capacity to develop. Although Hegel elaborately described numerous forms of consciousness in his Phenomenology of Spirit, we will only consider the three elementary forms mentioned by Kant in his Critique of Pure Reason: 1. Sensuous apprehension, 2. Perception, and 3. Comprehension. It may be helpful to consider that these three forms correspond respectively to the categories of being, essence, and concept enunciated in Hegel's logic. The word sentient is related to senses and sensuous. Dr. Puri writes, quote, "That which can feel or experience is sentient," end quote. So, all sentient life forms from cells to insects, through plants, aquatics, birds, and mammals, have the capacity for the sensuous apprehension of immediate being. Perception is a slightly higher or more mature stage of conscious development, where that which is sensuously apprehended begins to form a subjective representation, a reflection of external objects in the mirror of the mind. Perception is a preconception, an immediate intuition or an implicit notion of essence that is yet to be explicitly and thoroughly developed. Finally, comprehension indicates completeness, a mature concept that thoughtfully conceives the whole process of conscious experience. 1. The immediate apprehension of external objects, 2. The subjective mental reflection of objects, and 3. The interpenetrating dependent relationship between the two that recognizes mind playing an active role in determining objects and simultaneously the thing in itself exerting influence on what the mind can possibly determine. This brief overview of the stages of conscious development is an introduction to the more detailed topic of the subjective evolution of consciousness. To briefly emphasize the essential point that sense data is meaningless without the mediation of a conscious agent, we may quickly look to robotics and consider what is involved in a robot determining an appropriate response to environmental circumstances. First, the photoelectric tube of a robot detects the object and generates an electric current. Then the current is sent to a computer to process specific data and provide instructions for the robot, sent through an electric signal. Finally, the servo motor receives the signal and moves the robot toward or away from the object. The middle step, the role of the computer, which is the indirect activity of conscious agent, i.e. whoever programmed it, gives purpose to the sense data by determining an appropriate response based on the data's content. Now, returning back to the three stages of conscious development being discussed, for scientists stuck between sensuous apprehension and perception, the appearance of mind-body or mind-matter duality drives them to neglect the mind in favor of matter, inevitably giving rise to reductionist approaches and producing atomistic conclusions about experienced reality. On the other hand, thoughtful scientists who are able to rise to the platform of comprehension conceive the variegated parts of reality within the context of the greater whole, which may be seen on various scales or from different angles of vision. The differentiation of the parts is never lost when considering the unity of the whole. The difference becomes sublated or implicit within the explicit unified whole. Similarly, the unity of the whole is never lost when emphasis is placed on the part. It just becomes implicit, since the explicit part always belongs to something from which it derives its essential qualities, function, and purpose. The idea of sublation, the integrity of individual distinction being sustained while an individual is identified with a greater collective or whole, may be easier to grasp when we recall the relationship between familiar concepts like I and we, or my and our. When a person identifies himself with a larger group, they say we. Their individual self is maintained yet integrated into a broader collective which takes on a singular identity of its own, such as a sports team or business organization. We sublates many I's. Thus, the Constitution of the United States of America begins with "We the people." Similarly, the Lord's Prayer starts with "Our Father." The universality of we and our is numerically and categorically different from I and my, but there is also an identity amongst them. Even in set theory, we find 1 the set, 2 a member of the set, and 3 their relation. So, as previously quoted from Dr. Puri, quote, "When considered in mere opposition, duality seems to represent no relation. But when each aspect of duality is considered as relatable to the other, we arrive at being for self. End quote. We've also already described that a proper science of thought and consciousness is fundamental to both science and religion, and that the dynamic organic activity of thought is differentiated into the moments of knower or subject, known or object, and knowing or consciousness. Just as studying knowing or knowledge is called epistemology, the study of the known object is ontology, and the self-conscious knower is the topic of theology. Thus, Dr. Bhaktimadhava Puri concludes, quote, "To claim that the Absolute is a sentient being or sentient substance is to recognize its ability to feel and experience. This completely revolutionizes the presupposition of modern science that reality is ultimately impersonal, insentient substance or matter. The materialized conception of the universe finds it impossible to explain how sentience or life came from insentient matter. If life or sentience is primordial, however, the hard problem that materialism faces is immediately resolved. In reality, it is the final end that determines and guides all the other factors. When the unity of the whole is sentient or self-conscious, even a systems approach will not be sufficient to explain its existence. Systems are not self-conscious. Without knowing the purpose for an individual's own self-conscious existence, one has only a false conception of self, or false ego. One's true identity is established only when it is comprehended in relation to a proper concept of the complete whole. This complete whole is the all-accommodating, all-pervading, all-unifying, all-attracting, self-conscious, and self-knowing absolute truth who is known by many names." End quote. The highest perfection of being for other is love of God, referred to as Krishna Prem in Sanskrit and Amor Dei in Latin. This conception requires understanding that truth as involving consciousness means that the truth is personal. The process for attaining Krishna Prem described throughout Vedic literature is called Bhakti Yoga, or the yoga of devotion, or being for other. Thus, it is a systematic process for decentering the self. Naturally, such activity cannot be confined to sectarian thinking. Non-sectarian thinking can be likened to a glimmering diamond that reflects various different colors off of its many facets. Each of these colors or perspectives may be considered a single religion or even scientific worldview. When an observer sees only a single color coming from one of the diamond's facets and asserts that this one color is the entirety of the diamond, and that anyone else who sees some other color coming from another facet is wrong, then sectarian dogma arises, in science, philosophy, religion, and any other social context. Knowledge of the whole diamond, however, inclusive of its many perspectives, i.e. its facets and the colors reflected by them, is universal, non-sectarian spiritual wisdom, characterized by holistic thinking. Genuine realization of this holistic knowledge, which encompasses the best interest of every individual, is what leads sincere seekers to wholeheartedly hanker for the perfection of being for other as the rendering of loving devotional service to God through his energy or bona fide representative, the spiritual master. Satyameva Jayate, Shri Shri Guru Gauranga Jayate.